Welcome back, everyone, to Conner Prairie's newest one and only podcast, Beyond the Revolution. We're back, folks, in a way we've never been back before.
I know, look at this.
Exactly. We've never been on camera before. I hope you all aren't sick of me. I'm Easton.
And I'm Ryan. And I'm really excited. This first theme that we mentioned in last episode, but we're going to do a deep dive, is We the People, and its connection to here at Conner Prairie. We're also going to get a behind-the-scenes look at how the theme came to be and the national preparation that has gone into America 250.
How are you feeling?
Feeling great.
Good. I'm glad. Co-host. I'm also your co-host. And today we are joined by the president and CEO of Conner Prairie Museum, Norman Burns. Welcome.
Good to see you, Easton. I'm always excited. I've been able to do one of these podcasts, I guess, in season one. Mm-hmm. And so I'm happy to be back, especially in 2026. You know, as a social historian, I've been waiting for this moment for a long time, I think, because I was there at the bicentennial 50 years ago, and now I'm here at the semi-quincentennial, and so that's quite an honor. I've lived long enough to go kind of through two of these national celebrations now, and to be at Conner Prairie at this time is just a remarkable feeling.
Yeah, I mean, and this is a huge year for us, too. I mean, we're reopening the Museum Experience Center. We're in the new building. It's beautiful, and there's a lot of pride. I'm feeling it's like opening day coming up.
And Norman, you're the perfect guest to have today because you're not just the president and CEO of Conner Prairie. You've been thinking about America 250 for a long time on the national level. And so we're so glad that you're here today. I do want to start with kind of unpacking what that means. We the People in the Constitution's preamble is taken straight from American Association for State and Local History, which do you want to talk about how you got involved with them and sort of where you were when all of these conversations were happening?
Well, I actually got started with the American Association for State and Local History, AASLH, back when I first got started in the profession 38 years ago. So I've worked with them closely, both as just a museum practitioner and then serving on committees and boards. But I had the great honor of serving on their board for 14 years and as their chair for two of those, and of course past chair as well. But it was during that time that I was on the board that we began the process of thinking about, all right, we have the semi-quincentennial coming up. That's a big deal, especially for an organization that's a national organization that is there to serve their membership, which is primarily history museums, historical societies, archives. This is kind of our moment in time, if you will, to say, okay, what do we think about the 250th? And looking back, and what did we think about the 200th? How's that different? And so I remember us having some deep conversations at the board level and committee levels about what do we really need to do. And it really started with, let's put together a guidebook, and a guidebook that can really help our organizations do history right, especially during this 250th celebration. And then we started looking at the themes. And of course, We the People was an easy theme to come up with because, as you said, the preamble of the Constitution, it lays it out there. It's a plural. It's we. It's not a select few of people in the United States. It's we the people. And we wanted to make sure that as historical organizations, as archives, as museums like Conner Prairie, that we're telling everyone's story, that we open up this large American story to everyone and make it accessible. And so that's why the guidebook is so important. And we have, I think it's maybe one of the best things that AASLH has ever done. I'd have to confirm that with our CEO, John Dicto, but I do feel like it's been so well received. It's been used not only in the museum community, it's been used by school systems, it's been used by state commissions that are doing the 250 around the United States. It's been used by universities. So as a past board member of AASLH and still a current member of AASLH, I'm very proud of that document. I'm proud of my colleagues that were serving on the board at that time and that were absolutely at the forefront of developing that guidebook and all the programs that AASLH is doing that's really set the stage, I think, for even an organization like Made by Us, which we also are involved with. I think the AASLH guidebook really helped museums think a little differently. And I go back to the beginning, even before we were doing that, we started a group. I was fortunate to be with a group of colleagues as we stood in D.C. one day and talked about how history just was not as relevant as it should be. And I think this was around 2011. And we started about what would that look like. And out of that came what was known as the History Relevance Campaign, and eventually History Relevance. And I think, and we were a part of that. I served on that group. And it started looking at the themes of the 250th coming up. And then ASLH took that, and History Relevance kind of came under the umbrella of ASLH. And eventually 250 actually, I think, came out of the History Relevance Campaign. A lot of those themes started all the way back in 2012.
Yeah, and I love the guidebook. Admittedly, it was one of my first touch points with thinking about America 250, and it influenced a lot of the stuff we're going to be talking about on this podcast, the things that we're going to be talking about at Conner Prairie. But I just love how it had the foresight to be thinking about, yes, this is a commemoration of a single moment that happened 250 years ago, but it's so much more. And thinking like we the people, while it's taken from the Constitution, it impacts us today, and it is something that you don't have to live on the East Coast and be a part of that history to really explore, unpack, do programming with. And yeah, so to me, that guidebook really shaped, like, again, the podcast episode is Beyond the Revolution,
Mm-hmm.
but how do we have these conversations about America 250 that is beyond the revolution?
This is what AASLH has to say about this theme here. I'm quoting verbatim here.
Yes.
Since the nation's founding, definitions of the people, the boundaries of national belonging, and the very nature of citizenship have changed. For much of our history, the United States has excluded people, so women, free and enslaved African Americans, indigenous individuals, immigrants, people with disabilities, the poor, the list goes on. And they were all barred from full participation and representation in the nation's political, economic, and cultural life. Yet over time, the United States has also incorporated people of different backgrounds into our society, as diverse populations have kind of staked their claim to belonging and pressed for a more pluralistic, more equitable nation. The expansion of citizenship and belonging has never been predetermined nor guaranteed, and changes for our population remain a subject of debate and conflict today.
And so my question to you is, why is We the People so relevant to the work that we do here at Conner Prairie?
Well, I think the very nature of We the People is exactly what Prairie Town is. I mean, I think most people that have listened to this podcast know that Conner Prairie is the living history site, and that Prairie Town started as a village doing 1836. We now say established in 1836, and we talk about things before that date and things way after that date. Vis-a-vis Promised Land is Proving Ground, which takes it all the way up to the present, and that's actually in Prairie Town. That being said, we have told the story of people, immigrants and people that were not your typical European, what you think of European settlers. And we've told that story at Conner Prairie for over half a century. So this is not new to Conner Prairie. Even the composite fictional village of Prairie Town, at its core, is We the People. And it's always opened it up to visiting groups, whether they be family with children or especially school groups. That's why we're so important in the fourth grade field trip circuit, because we really check off that box, if you will, in a very positive way. But We the People is important because not all the people have been represented, as you just read, Easton. Even as we think about this 250 coming up and we're thinking about the Declaration of Independence, we had a promise that we had certain rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And has that truly been the case for every person that lives in America from the very beginning? And that answer is no, it hasn't. But it's also part of that American story, that American fabric of how we continue to evolve. And that's part of what you were just reading there. We continue to evolve, and our documents that created this country allows us to have that evolution. I know some of them seem restrictive, but they were written for us to have debates, open debates. even our separation of powers between Congress and the executive office and the judicial branch was all created so we could have these checks and balances, so we could have open and honest dialogues, and people could disagree with each other. If people think it's contentious today, read back about 225 years ago and look at all the political parties have been at each other for years, and they voted against each other. There hasn't been cooperation, but when it's all said and done, we have a document that is the envy of the world when it comes to the fact that we, the people, have an opportunity to work with each other. Sometimes a certain group of people will try to dominate over others, but our documents, our founding documents, allow us to have that debate. That's why a place like Conner Prairie is so important. That's why museums are important, because we have the ability to have this open dialogue and create a safe place for what sometimes is unsafe ideas, to be quite frank with you.
Yeah, and it's really at the fabric and core of Conner Prairie. You always mention with the mission that it's for everyone,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a really, really lofty aspirational goal, but it is at the core what Conner Prairie is trying to do.
It is, and you've heard me say this a million times, that is a lofty goal. And people say, well, you can't serve everyone. And we say, well, you're probably right, but it's not because we shouldn't try.
Right. Mm-hmm.
We shouldn't reach out to other groups. And maybe we don't have the agency for that story, but as a history organization, we want that story to be told. And so we'll reach out to a group and we'll say, we would love to work with you. You know, we would love for you to be able to tell your story and tell it honestly. And that's what a place like Conner Prairie can do. And that's how we can at least say we're trying to serve everyone when we allow groups to work with an organization, whether it's Conner Prairie or any museum in America. That's why our aspirational goal since 2018 has been to try to change the way the world views and uses museums. And that's the very case of that. We want to view museums like Conner Prairie more than just a history organization. We want to see that we are a community asset, that we're an open door, if you will. Matter of fact, a lot of our language talks about open doors, and our interpretation in Prairie Town, open doors to what we say that we want to have open doors to diversity of voices and limitless experiences at Conner Prairie. Open doors. That's what I think museums have been doing for years, and at 250, that's more important than ever because we have this opportunity, this moment in time to discuss this. And remember, this has been 250 years in the making. This isn't just one moment in time. We have 250 years to talk about, and then we've got to think about what's the next 250 look like. And I think that's just as critical to our conversation today than it is to remember a moment in time, because we also need to be thinking about the future. And I know sometimes that seems like I can't wrap my head around that, but I remind people that there's only 2 seconds that separates the past from the future, if you think about it. And so in that continuum of time, we're making history almost every second of every day. And we need to keep that in mind in how we're doing it and how a place like Conner Prairie is so important.
And for me, it's what is the point of learning history if not to take it forward into the future? The stories that we're sharing now will influence how we think of ourselves, how we think of our place on this land in the future. And so all of this is connected, and it's a disservice if we do, history, present, future in a vacuum. I know you've been basically answered this, but I do want to say outright, what do you think museums' role in America 250 is?
Well, I think we have, once again, that role that we should I'll go back to the open doors, but our doors should be open, and we should be active in allowing our audiences to learn from this moment in time. And it's, words are thrown around like, do we celebrate? Do we celebrate, there's been some really ugly history the past 250 years. Do we really want to celebrate that? And I'm looking at the two of you, and you represent Gen Z. And that's not you don't necessarily want to celebrate all these things. So we talk about commemorate. But I do, as a word, we commemorate this moment in time. But I think museums' roles are to do more than just that. This gives us an opportunity to open that dialogue, to do programs that lets our public, our visiting public, know that we are a place where they can learn these things. But more importantly, it's kind of the first step in that. We're not a university. We're not a classroom. We're not here to teach people all of the content, but we are here to inspire. That's in our very mission statement, to inspire curiosity and foster learning. That's exactly what Conner Prairie is here to do. And I think in the 250th, when I look at, and I'm just so excited, and as a colleague of all the programs that's been developed by our experienced team for this year, they've actually gone much farther than what I could have ever imagined just a couple of years ago when I was thinking about what could Conner Prairie do. And just yesterday, I was on a video virtual meeting with Secretary Lonnie Bunch of the Smithsonian with directors of all the affiliate programs, or those that were participating in this particular thing, and just listening to what all of our colleagues are doing around the United States for the 250th. And this is just Smithsonian colleagues, and listening to what we're doing, I'm very proud of our profession. I'm very proud of what we're doing in the 250th, which I think is much more than we ever did 50 years ago. And I was around back then, and I remember some of the things. Great programs, great things, but I think we're even more grassroots this time around. And what did come out of the bicentennial is grassroots efforts that created a lot of historic house museums, many of which are no longer around. And so I'm curious, you asked me, what is the role of museums? Some of us actually came out of that movement, that bicentennial movement of 1976. Actually, Conner Prairie was around before that, but we had growth because of the bicentennial. So I think to myself, what is Conner Prairie going to look like, 50 years from now? What programs are we going to be doing differently than we're doing today? But I think it's still going to be, we provide that place for people to learn. And if they are inspired, that's going to foster their learning. If they hear a tidbit of information about Lenape and how they were forcefully removed, 8 different locations by the time of their permanent, but how that culture has evolved and remained and spread out in even more areas, they're going to want to research and learn more about that. Literally just had we were touring some people from Disney yesterday. Yes, we were touring people from Disney yesterday.
So cool.
And someone heard a story in Power of Place, and they said, I've got to go learn more about that. Oh my God, that was like one of those moments, like that's exactly why history museums exist, is to inspire that curiosity so they will go learn more. And so at this moment in time, the 250th, I think that's exactly why we're here. So hope I didn't ramble on too long with that.
And that's why I appreciate Conner Prairie so much, is its flexibility. It was set up in the bicentennial, but it was very careful what it was doing. It wasn't buying into maybe more of a celebration. It was like, how do we tell this story of everyday people during 1836, but it has allowed us to be flexible with what that means, focusing on the human experience in whatever facet that is. And so I have a lot of appreciation for the work that was done in the bicentennial, even though I wasn't around. But I am curious, one of the things we wanted to talk about is, so we're young people in this America 250, but what was it like, being around bicentennial? How did that influence maybe your work today?
To be quite frank with you, it had everything to do with my work today. I think that's probably what inspired my generation, to be quite frank with you, that we were teenagers, to get into museum work. So going back, I grew up in a family where we told stories, oral traditions. So I learned a lot about my community, so local history, from my grandparents and all of their siblings and such, so all of my family. So I always had that at a core. But I was a history geek. Yes, I was, as you can imagine. But I joined the history club my freshman year of high school. And the history club and the Key Club, the high school sponsor was the same for both of those, wanted to do something special for our high school in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And so kind of put it out there to the history club and to the Key Club, what do we want to do? And that evolved from 1975 over into 76. So I started as a freshman, was a sophomore by the time we got around to various projects. And it just was so engaging. I mean, all the different things we did, from a film that we showed for the host school to see. There was a film that came out called 1776, and we actually showed that. And that's got some interesting dialogue and things in it that back in the mid-'70s, I don't think schools necessarily would have I don't think they knew what they were getting into when we aired that for the entire school. But that's an example of something that a school wouldn't normally do, but it was celebrating a moment in time. And then we did a time capsule, the typical time capsule thing, and it was actually in a legitimate, what I would call a legitimate type capsule. I don't remember exactly what it looked like, but it was a chest and it was lockable and it was kind of airproof. It wasn't a coffee can because we also did coffee can things at my church and places, and those things don't exist anymore. But I've recently thought back about that time capsule, and we're all asked to put something in it. Most people are like a thought for the future or something that represents yourself, and I remember that I wrote a little note and put in it, and I told you this, I think, the other day.
Yeah.
I'm racking my brain to try to remember what I said, but it wasn't necessarily a wish. It was what I think my beliefs about what America was today. I think that's what I was expressing, and I know we may talk about Made by Us a little bit later and maybe the wish wall, but that's the very purpose of Made by Us wish wall, is we're allowing your generation to say, or older, but especially your generation, say, this is my wish for America. This is my wish for democracy. And I can tell you that when I was 15 and 16 years old, back when we were planning all these programs and all these things were happening for the bicentennial, I had those same desires. And that inspired me, I think, to really start thinking about history. Now, it took me a few years to get to doing my history major because I thought I wanted to be an engineer. Then I thought I wanted to be in computer science. It took me a while to finally come back around to that initial thing that got me excited about history in the first place, which was local history, my family's history, and how that applied to what the lessons we learned in the bicentennial about the greater story, we the people.
Yeah. And at some point, I'll have to ask you what computer science looked like in the 1970s, because we only have like a modern perspective of it. But
well, you know what it was. We actually did programming with punch cards.
That's
and on mainframe. By the time I got to the later classes, we were doing programming on mainframe. But it was like basic Fortran 4, it's those type of languages back then.
Wow.
COBOL COBOL still exists and Fortran does too, but I mean the earliest versions of that.
Yeah. Well, and I'm so sad that you don't remember what you wrote in that note, but we are running a youth program called Democracy and Dialogue. Easton's been on it. Mm-hmm. Kids loved Easton. He took them through a tour of PLPG, but we've been having conversations because we were talking about like oral histories. Who should you interview? And it's really important to capture what young people are thinking about this moment. And I think about like the things that I've created for Made by Us or here at Conner Prairie. All of it's digital born. So in theory, it's going to, I won't have to dig it up and, see what I wrote. But it's really interesting to see how my thoughts might change in the next 50 years, or my thoughts, on this country, on certain aspects of history. It's just really interesting. And and every generation should have their thoughts captured, especially in moments like this.
And the great thing about it being in the digital realm that you're creating, I go back to the idea of the time capsule. I mean, a lot of things can happen. First of all, the people who put the time capsule in the ground maybe don't document it and has forgotten the time. I mean, it's just forgotten until someone accidentally runs across it. And then sometimes construction gets rid of it or is over the top of it. So I told you about the time capsule that we did at my high school. There's a building sitting on top of it now. Because when I was thinking about the time capsule thing, I thought, I'm going to look and see. I kind of remember where we buried it. And sure enough, there's a building. There's no one at the school to say, hey, there's a time capsule there. Let's dig it up.
Oh,
I was going to say, do you know if there's any time capsules in the new Welcome Center when they built it, or did we put one in?
We did. You may remember we all signed a beam. And so all of our staff, any staff member that wanted to could come over and take a marker and we put our names on it. A few people put their wishes on it. But I know you asked me this a couple of days ago and I'm like, oh my gosh, that was an opportunity we missed, but that doesn't mean, and I think what I suggested, maybe our time capsule, instead of being the cornerstone of the building, we put it in our collections.
Right.
And that becomes a usable, so we don't look at it 50 years from now. Maybe we revisit it annually and say, all right, what was our aspirations and hopes for things that we're doing then, and how's it going to change each and every year?
Oh, I love that. And especially going back to that piece about like how different our different generations kind of interact with history is, for a lot of us, my like I never got to do a time capsule, but the time capsules that I do have, like my old phones, my old Nokia, like, or not Nokia, but like my first like touchscreen picture phone, I still have it. And since I can't get that stuff off of that phone, sometimes I go and I look and I see. And one of the oldest videos I have of myself in history club is from, I was in 8th grade and our history club was called We the People. And they were teaching us about how the United States is like a sovereign nation. And it's like, to this day, one of the oldest things that I own. And so like, that's just what it reminded me of, and thinking about like how different generations kind of interact with history and how a lot of it's, digital for us and not so material.
And we think about history. I'm going to go back to the phone as an example. We think about how history seems like it's so long ago. My paternal grandfather was born in December of 1899. He passed away in 1992. And so he saw, think about all the things that he saw change, including
the plane,
but the internet and even cell phones. Now, they were really huge and clunky at that time, but in his time frame. And I experienced some of those same things. And while I had the early cell phones when I was growing up, we literally had the old rotary phone, and we weren't the only person on the line. We had a shared line. There were 6 other people on the line, and so our ring was, I think, a 2 long rings and a short, and that we knew that was the person calling us, and we'd pick up, and then we'd have to tell all the other people to get off because we had nosy neighbors.
It's incredible because thinking 50 years ago, how the democratization of history has changed, and how even 50 years ago, you probably thought, oh, wow, we have access to cameras. They have film in it. We can photograph a lot more than we were able to 50 years ago. Writing a lot more accessible. And now 50 years on, we have all of this technology that has exploded even further. What is the next 50 years going to look like for, writing down history or, capturing history in different ways? It's kind of crazy to think about.
Yeah, it's really, from an oral history standpoint, I used to take the old, tape recorder, the flat tape recorder, and go out and record things on cassette tapes. And I did a series of interviews with my paternal grandfather and had 6 hours of cassette tapes. And unfortunately, during one of my moves, they were lost. But the same thing can apply to, cassette tapes, any type of, and format can, over time, degrade. And that's the great thing about the digital. While analog may have great sound, analog does degrade over time. Digital, for the most part, once you load it up into the into the cloud, so to speak, and it's on all these different servers, it generally is going to be around.
Yeah. I do want to explore just how the America 250 or how American history was talked about in the bicentennial a little bit more, to sort of give us context for how a lot of institutions are approaching America 250. Did you think back then that they were spending too much time on, the East Coast, thinking about just the revolution? Or did you think back in the bicentennial, they were already thinking about how can we make this more expansive, this commemoration?
Well, there were a lot of things. There was the bicentennial train that actually had exhibits on it that went through and parked in communities, and it came to Nashville, Tennessee, and so I went to see that as one of the great ventures at that time. And so there are a lot of national celebrations, and so I think the bicentennial was about the big events. However, it was also about grassroots. And so while AASLH wasn't around, they were around, but while they didn't do a guidebook necessarily on the bicentennial at that time, there were a lot of local people that knew that they wanted to preserve those stories. And so I think that's the grassroots part of the bicentennial that lived on, once again, in what we're doing today. AASLH actually did have a technical leaflet, I think, back in 1976 on how to celebrate the bicentennial. I think I still have it. It's obviously very dated now, but very much more grassroots. But I think about whether it was the bicentennial train or the things that was being done on the mall in D.C., it was a lot of big celebrations and perhaps not focused on we the people, it was we the nation. So it was more about what we've accomplished in 200 years. Mm-hmm. Nothing wrong with that. I think we do need to be both proud but also question some of the things that we've done in 200 years or 250 years. And I think that is what we hope for out of the 250. And when I say we, I mean we the profession of museums. And, maybe the White House thinks a little differently about that it's a little bit more about the large, great stories, and we're not telling everyone's stories. We're telling the great stories of America, and that's a shame. But that doesn't mean that's just coming out of one source. It doesn't mean that the 99% of the rest of us that are at history museums and such, we're doing that. We're telling all the stories. And I think that's an important thing to encourage people about is just because there might be rhetoric that's out there, whether it's coming from D.C. or a state house or even a local courthouse about America 250 and what we should be celebrating and what we should not be celebrating. I think we need to remember it's our choice. We had literally have a Declaration of Independence, we had Articles of Confederation, and we had the Constitution of the United States that laid out what we can do as a people. And we need to be reassured of that. Sure, right now the political system seems broken, but it's been broken before. And I want to encourage all of us to make sure that we don't ignore what our civic responsibility is, which is to monitor these things and then try our best to vote for candidates that will bring some of these things that we hold dear. Remember, we hold dear. That's a phrase. We hold dear these rights, and so I think that's important for history museums. Once again, to be that place that the doors open, just to say things like that, just so people understand that, not to question, not to get in rhetoric with people over that, but to open dialogue.
The natural curiosity of youth.
Do you remember the Joy Corner?
No. So he was on only our
Oh.
first episode.
Wow, that's been overdue. So now we were very nervous back then. Now we've got some nice, cool stuff in to break up the conversation. So we ask our guests, we all answer, unless you don't want to answer.
Yeah,
but
this came out of This is Reclamation because there is a lot of heavy conversation, especially asking people's personal perspectives of how, the weight of that history impacted them. So we wanted a way to break it out, and so we created Joy Corner. It's also a way for us to kind of get to know our guest. We already kind of know you, so it's okay we're doing this at the end.
So now we're taking a break for the Joy Corner. We are carrying this over from This is Reclamation. By the way, please go listen to This is Reclamation and This is Problematic while you're at it. It's good stuff, unless you already haven't. And shout out to our podcast OGs who have seen all three. So I want to talk about, first and foremost, we'll do the more heavy-ish question first. Do any of you all know the origins of your name? So maybe like both the linguistics, but also if you know why your parents chose that for your name. I'll let you go first unless you don't.
Well, I'm actually named for my father.
Okay.
And Norman.
I was going to say you're the third, right?
I'm actually the second. But Norman is a Roman term, and it has a very positive connotation. Our last name Burns comes from burn house or burn side, which has a little bit of a negative connotation, meaning that their houses were burned down because they were being moved out of a village at that time in Ireland and Scotland. But that being said, my paternal grandparents named my father Norman Osborne Burns. That is not a family name. So I've looked through all of our genealogy. There's never been a Norman. There's never been an Osborne. And so I didn't have a chance to ever ask my grandparents this question, but I asked my father, where did they come up with that name? And he said there was a doctor in a local community whose name was Norman, and they respected him. I have no idea where they came up with Osborne. He didn't know about that one. He knew about the Norman. And so I'm the fourth of 4 children. I have a brother that's 12 years older than I am, a brother and sister that are twins that are 8 years older than I am, and then I came along. I made the mistake of asking my parents why they waited so long to have their 4th child, and I got the wrong answer I wanted to hear from my father at that time. But that being said, well, I'll go ahead and say it. He said, "Son, you're an accident." And my mother, who's so sweet, reached over and put her hand on my knee and said, "Son, you weren't an accident. You were a blessing from God."
Blessing.
A blessing.
A blessing.
Typical type of thing a mother would say.
Oh, I
but
love that.
all of that to say that I guess because I came along that way, that my father decided to, take his name. So I had the good fortune, I guess, that I came along a little bit later, and he wanted to name a son after himself. And instead of calling me Junior, which is what I should have been because I was named for my father, growing up in Tennessee in the South at that time, if you were Junior, that's pretty much what you were called. So I would have never been called Norman. I never would have been. I would have been Junior. So on my birth certificate, they put the second, even though that should technically be like an uncle named somebody or whatever. And then they gave me a nickname, and so I'm going to be really open to everyone here. This is now going to be out there forever.
Oh, love that.
Some people on staff know this. Maybe you two even know this. So they realized that Norman Osborne Burns was not a name was necessarily common in the early 60s, and that's something I would have to live with. And perhaps as a baby, Norman wasn't a name. So they took my initials, N-O-B, and added a Y. And so from birth until I went to college, I was known as Noby Burns.
Noby Burns.
Noby Burns, not Norman Burns. And so when I went to college, I remember the day it happened. In classes used to, the teacher would say, fill out a 3x5 card with the name, all the information, and the name that you want to be called at roll. So I was a freshman in college, and I'd done that, and this, whatever the class was, this professor is reading through, and because my last name is Burns, it's towards the front of the roll call. And he looks down, he probably had bifocals or trifocals like me, and he looks down at the card and he says, "Naughty Burns."
Naughty.
And I raised my hand. I said, "Noby Burns." I kind of did, but Nobly Burns? And I said, "Just call me Norman."
Oh.
And from that point on, I used my common name of Norman. So I have all of my family and people that knew me all the way through high school know me as Noby Burns, and everyone in College Fort knew me as Norman Burns. And so, but that's kind of the origin, the good and the bad of kind of my name, and I'm very proud of it now because my father passed back in 2016, shortly after I arrived here at Conner Prairie, and I think now I'm no longer Norman Osborne Burns II. I'm Norman Osborne Burns because my father's no longer here, and so I carry that, and I carry that with pride, but I also carry it with some sense of sadness because my father's passed, and someday I'll pass, and that's not a name no one else wants to carry in my family, but it also means that that's a name that'll stand out as future generations, hopefully of public historians and my family, want to do genealogy and look back and they thought, well, who are these two people? Why were they Normans? And hopefully I will have explained that story well enough.
That was beautiful. Thank you. Ryan, do you want to go next?
Yeah, admittedly, mine will be pretty short. I know Ryan is Irish. For Little King, I'm not really sure who was a Little King, but here at Conner Prairie, we have a ton of Ryans. One of my supervisors, his name is Ryan, but we also had a former staff member, Ryan King, and we would always jokingly, to separate us, we would call me Ryan and him Little King.
King.
His name literally was Ryan, or Little King King.
I forgot about that story.
Yeah. And then my last name, German, it's either comes from, a part of a leg, so either a butcherer, but I also heard possibly a tavern keeper referred to as a shank. So, yeah, Swiss German.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Well, I will go with mine. Mine is actually a very interesting story. So I hope this isn't getting into the TMI category. Well, you know what?
I did.
You opened up,
I
so
did.
I will say. Okay, when my mom went into the ultrasound, I was supposed to be a girl and my name was supposed to be Paige, because when I went into the ultrasound, I guess I was a modest person and I covered up different parts of me. And so, that they were just like, it's a girl, And so I was supposed to be named Paige. And then when I finally arrived, and I arrived 3 months early, in addition to scaring the crap out of my parents, they were like, oh my gosh, it's a boy. So what are we going to call him? They weren't thinking of boy names. So for a little while, I was known as the Prince.
Okay.
Because I had a very regal appearance. I was very small. I needed a lot of extra care, and I came on my own accord. So later on, my mom actually rolled past. They were like going somewhere, probably on their way back to visit me in the NICU, because I was in the little incubator, so small. And they rolled past Eaton, Ohio, and she was like, Eaton, Easton, and that's how it kind of went together. And it's actually like, I think it's English, but also a little bit of Scottish. It literally just means a town in the east. But it's also cool because, the sun rises in the east, and my parents liked that. So that's how Easton came to be.
Well, Easton rolls off the tongue a little bit easier than Norman.
Oh, I think they're both cool, though. They both sound very, well, all of them really sound royal to me. I think it's the N at the end.
I think I've heard this before, but you may remember the show in the early 80s, Cheers, and there's a character on that called Norm, and he'd walk into the bar and say, hey, Norm.
Yeah.
And so for the longest, I hated it when people called me Norm because of that. I walk in the place, they say, hey, Norm. But now I've realized it's a term of, if I feel comfortable with someone, and I love it now, actually. I don't mind it when people call me Norm, but I got so tired of it back in the 80s because of that show.
Interesting, because I've heard people call you Norm,
Yeah.
and I'm like, his name's Norman, but I'm not going to correct.
It's okay if you call me
people.
Norm.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Oh, and then the second question, forgot about the second question, is what do you do when you have nothing to do?
Wow. So when I have nothing to do, sometimes it's literally rest, but my wife and I both, we love to be outside. And so we love to take walks. We love to find nature trails. We haven't been able to do it as much lately, but we love to bike on the trail. We have great trails, by the way. I'm going to put on my Hamilton County Tourism board member hat for just a moment. Hamilton County, Indiana has great trails, by the way, great bicycling, great walking. And while we may not have mountains, we have a lot of ravines and a lot of rivers and some beautiful landscape around us. So, but we enjoy getting out and doing that, and we love to listen to nature. And so that's why the trail system here at Conner Prairie is very important to me. Love to do that. I love looking out my window, even on the west side of the property, and seeing deer, go running by. Not everyone gets to see that on many of the days. So, yeah, it's really those types of things, because I grew up on a farm that had forested area, had ponds, it had creeks, and did the typical things of being a wild child and running around. So I still enjoy those types of things. I love to read, and I know this is going to sound geeky, but I love to do genealogy, and I actually love to do research. I'm actually probably at my happiest when I'm doing historic research.
Wow, I love that. I've heard a lot of people talk about how research has become their happy place. I'm not one of those people. I think I'll go next, just because.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't like to really research in my in my spare time.
I will back you up on that. So Easton is our researcher, but it's like I don't like to make videos on my spare time because it starts to feel too much like work.
Work.
Right. And so I want to have that distinction. So I know I 100% get that.
Yeah, because the whole thing, when I have trouble with this question, and my dad actually recommended I ask this question because he's a researcher too, but he's more scientific research. And he says it's hard for people to answer this question because they usually either say a chore or an obligation. Well, I change my kid's diaper, I vacuum the house. It's no. When you have nothing to do. So for me, I really liked creative writing as a kid. And so I like to write. I used to write poetry. I used to write. And so all that kind of stuff I kind of stopped doing in school. And now that I'm out of school, it's okay, I'm starting to get back into it. So I love to write. I also like to exercise. I play kickball. But again, since I pay to play kickball, I guess you could say that's kind of like an obligation. So it's like, so that really doesn't count. But like, I do like to go for walks, but like creative writing is really, I've just really missed writing like that, because in my profession, I feel like I'm, kind of tied to nonfiction, because you can't create in the traditional sense in my job. So
I love writing too. I just don't have I don't have the time to do it. I've had a book that's literally been sitting there for 11 years now because I haven't had time to get back to it. But that is a happy place for me, is being able to do that.
We're kindred spirits.
Yeah.
Well, I have two things. First off, this is my office. So if you've noticed, there is Lego in the background. That is 100% one of my hobbies. I love just building Lego.
Ryan's our Lego guy.
And then about a year ago, I have been on this weird quest. So my partner went back to grad school and works the weekends now. So I have a lot of free weekends, and I've just had to find something to do. So I'm just going to every single museum I possibly can.
Yeah, tell them about that.
So last year I ended up making 200 museum visits.
I saw that. That's unbelievable. I don't think I've done 200 museums in my life.
Me neither.
It was a lot. The goal this year is 250.
New ones, right? So
no,
totally different.
So I went to about 150 new museums last year, and then museum visits.
Okay.
That's why we were having the conversation earlier. Does coming to Symphony count as visiting a museum?
All right.
So to do that, I've had to go to so many small, rural museums in Indiana, and I just have such a better appreciation for the state that I live in than I ever have. And the truly passion, a lot of these museums, largely volunteer run, don't have the resources that Conner Prairie has, but truly are built and maintained by just the sheer passion for the stories that they're telling. And so I just have a way better appreciation for the state, and also what goes into smaller museums and how it takes, because I've only worked in large museums. And so I've learned a lot, and weirdly, that doesn't feel like work to me, even though I work in a museum. I love learning, and I think that's where it is. I just want to learn about stuff. And museums have always been kind of that accessible way to do it.
Well, now that you say that, my wife and I, we love to get out. So we do visit museums, but we love to visit parks, local, national, all those things. But we also like quirky things. And I don't know if you've been to see the world's largest painted ball, which is here in Indiana. So we love quirky little things like that. And actually, I'll say this. And while I was, going on all of these museums, it did make me think a lot about America 250, because a lot of these museums, they started their conversation about America 250 with the bicentennial. And what kind of lessons do you think, you've talked about a lot of the good work that came out of it, but what lessons do you think the history field, museum field learned from doing events, bicentennial events, moving forward? I do think that probably led us into, I'm a trained social historian, and I think the bicentennial is really what led to social history. You start seeing more and more, social history has been around longer than the bicentennial, but I think coming out of the bicentennial, you started seeing universities really focused on social history. And I started as an undergraduate in 1979, but I didn't really start focusing in. I told you I went through a couple majors. Didn't really start focusing in until the early 80s. And at that time, the university I was at really was focused on social history, as well as historic preservation, but I chose more of the academic side of social history. And that's what I really wanted. I identified with that. I identified with the fact that I grew up around a family that told stories, and that and a lot of really interesting stories, and not all good. And I like that. I like the fact that I had people in my community that looked like me and didn't look like me, and we all had stories. We all had stories to tell about our cultures, which were different. And I think that inspired me at that time. What happened in the bicentennial then led into my academic career to become a social historian. And then while I might have initially thought I was going to get a PhD and teach history, I am so glad that I didn't, because that led me into the public history sector, working in museums. And I've been afforded the opportunity to help lead organizations, be part of teams, and really do some great programs and be part of great programs and promote great programs as a result of that. I don't know that I ever would have been able to do if I was just standing at a lectern, droning on and on to students that may or may not care about what's being said.
Right. And with that, I want to ask your perspective. How long have you been at Conner Prairie?
A little more than a decade now.
A little more than a decade. In what ways have you been preparing Conner Prairie for not just the America 250, but it seems there's been so much groundwork to do the work that we are doing now. Smithsonian, Made by Us, AASLH. Can you just sort of talk me through big picture, your hopes and dreams and some of the work that you've started?
Well, let me address why Conner Prairie.
Okay.
Because if I go back, Conner Prairie is well known in our profession, as you know, as being an innovative. I mean, we go back 50 plus years on literally doing first person interpretation and all these things I told you about, the stories that we're telling about different cultures. Most history museums were only talking about, I'm just going to go ahead and say it, the great white male at that time. So here's the historic house, and here's the person, usually the man who had the house, and we might talk about the domestic things that are being done, but it's basically focused on that person, usually a male, who did some great thing, and that's how historic, and a lot of historic house museums coming out of the bicentennial did that. Conner Prairie was a little different. Sure, Eli Lilly purchased William Conner's home, and William Conner, once again, is that type of story, but Prairie Town itself, the village,
Right. It didn't stop at William Conner.
William Conner's
Yeah,
not
right.
really there. I mean, when you think about it, it's literally a composite of the people who came out of statehood in 1816, people that came in, and we haven't started talking about this whole thing about the Northwest Ordinance and all of those things, but that we're beginning to test the ideas of what came out of literally 1776.
Yeah, it's the generation after the Revolutionary
That's
generation.
exactly
Yeah.
right. So when I think about Conner Prairie, and you want to know why Conner Prairie and such, being a social historian, being someone who grew up in a rural area and loved nature and loved history and loved those things, I've always been close to the land. I've always been close to telling people stories. And while I've had the good fortune of working at some really great institutions, Conner Prairie is the first place where I could say I could put all of my passions, all of my loves together in one place. We got 1,046 acres of land and 3.3 miles of a river that runs right through the middle of it. We have this great place. That's why I'm so proud of the Power of Place immersive experience that people are going to be able to go through, because we allow the land and the river to tell the story before man ever arrives. And for me, Conner Prairie, this is a place, and it's in our mission statement, Conner Prairie is a unique historic place. That doesn't change. And I think that's what inspires me each and every day. And when I think about, if I go back, 10 and a half years ago when I got the phone call about, would you be interested in it? I'm going to just go ahead and say probably what I thought in my head. Well, hell yes. You may have to edit that out, but yeah, that's absolutely a place I want to be. And I was already thinking at that time, I know there's so much more there that can be done. It's done great things over the last 40 years, but there's so much more it can do. And I wanted to come in and I wanted to listen to the passion of the people that were here, and I wanted to challenge us, and I wanted to see how we could use this land a little differently. And I was already thinking, because of what I told you, we was already engaged in the history relevance program and already beginning to look at the idea of what we would do at 250. I was already thinking about what could Conner Prairie do. And I think if we go back, you're talking about the East Coast thing. It's easy to say, well, why would Conner Prairie? I mean, it's 1836. It's Indiana. What has that got to do with the Declaration of Independence in 1776? And you almost answered it before. It has everything to do with the Declaration of Independence in 1776. That tested an idea that allowed the Western expansion and the people being in places like Indiana and a place like Conner Prairie. And as a matter of fact, places like Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, Boston, New York, I can name all the cities that were the big cities, Williamsburg, and the 13 colonies. They're kind of focused in on that one year, that one event. We don't have to be.
I know.
We can actually tell the stories of we the people, and we can look at the whole 250-year gambit of history. So in a lot of ways, and I probably shouldn't say this out, we may be more important as museums because we can tell that greater story where our colleagues in places like Philadelphia really are expected to focus in on what happened on that July 4th, 1776 day.
And make it more relevant to our community here, right?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
our community. And that's what we the people are. We the people, even when you go back to when the Constitution, the preamble of the Constitution was written, I mean, we were in states at that point, but we had people all over, and they had come from different parts of the world already, and we had removed people that actually started here already, and so we the people was already being tested at that time.
Right. Yeah. It's something that I like to explain because I get the question all the time, what is Conner Prairie? And I explain it as like, it is this unique place where we are telling the stories of, movement of people and these mixing of cultures, because that's already happening in Indiana in ways it's not on the East Coast, and very visible ways too, especially the stories that we tell at Conner Prairie.
One of the things that was very, very intentional about this kind of new phase of Prairie Town, and like you said, Promised Land is Proving Ground is a part of Prairie Town, even though it doesn't look like the rest of Prairie Town. So essentially kind of addressing the question of like, okay, who's left out of the conversation and who are we then going to make intentional efforts to let in? And so Promised Land is Proving Ground really kind of ushered in that new era of we need to talk about, there are different stories that we need to talk about. Instead of hyper-focusing on one little space, we can kind of invite them into this story. And that also led to what we have with the Turner House, where, the Turner House is in this in-between area where, like, of course, it's reflecting that dream and spirit of Promised Land is Proving Ground, but they're Prairie Town residents. They're not a part of the exhibit.
But before Promised Land is Proving Ground, they were travelers to Prairie Town.
Right.
They would be traveling through, and they would just be there. And so that's Promised Land is Proving Ground gave us the ability to say we need to have that permanent residence. We need to have that permanent story being told. Just like Promised Land is Proving Ground, we had the story Follow the North Star that we won't go into, but that was a very limited program.
Right.
It only touched about 4,000 people a year, and it was only a limited amount of time for the year. We wanted to have something that people could learn from and experience each and every day, and that's what Promised Land is Proving Ground is, and that's why it needed to be integrated into Prairie Town and not a separate thing, and that's why I think it's significant. I don't know if other living history museums will ever be quite as bold as we are to, put something modern like our reclamation building at the end of the historic village. But I think about Colonial Williamsburg. They have modern buildings in the village because it's still a town. Right. So it's not like living history. We sometimes think of ourselves, it's got to be completely authentic. Well, as our colleague Ryan Spencer would say, well, we can't be authentic because if we were, there'd be a lot of disease and dying happening every day.
Yeah, it would smell real bad.
It'd smell real bad, and there's just certain things we're not going to do. But in this case, we want to be able to tell the stories. And Promised Land is Proving Ground is that first step, just like the Torn exhibit that is getting ready to open in the Museum Experience Center later this month, and the new Lenape experience that we're working on over the next 5 years to create. We're going to be telling that story a little differently than we've done. I don't know what the next story is after that, but that's the great thing about our staff. That's the great thing about this organization, our board, is they're willing to say, what is that next step? What is that next story we need to tell? And we want to tell everyone's stories, but we can't tell them all at the same time.
That's true.
It's physically impossible to tell everyone's story at the same time. So sometimes we have to say, all right, this is the story we're telling today. And I would even say, even though right now the reclamation building is about the Promised Land is Proving Ground as it relates to Black people in America, it could easily be a reclamation building about any group of people in America. And I think that's the future of that space, is it gives us the ability to think ahead and think about that. We may want to tell, even though we'll have an experience in the Lenape, more permanent experience in 5 years from now, maybe we want to test that Lenape story in reclamation because there's a lot of things that we need to talk about as it relates to that.
And intersectionality between those communities, too, that doesn't really get talked about.
Yeah. But Promised Land is proving ground. If we just look at the history going back 1,000 years and moving forward, it allowed us to test this idea of what Indiana is. The fact that the Northwest Ordinance created this territory of the United States north of the River Ohio and south of the River Ohio. My home state of Tennessee is the only part of the territory south of the River Ohio that actually became a state.
But special.
Well, I guess, but in this case, Indiana obviously is one of those states. But Promised Land is Proving Ground was testing that promise. What's the promise of literally this idea that we have the right of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Is that true? Is what we were getting ready to have in the new Constitution, didn't exist yet. Articles of Confederation, I think, were still in play, and we were testing this Northwest Ordinance in 1785. But the Northwest Ordinance said it was going to be free, but then it put that de facto thing of the 3/5 clause and things like that. So we're testing that with Promised Land as Proving Ground. We're saying, all right, what does that mean? Because while blacks could come to Indiana and be free, there was still prejudice. There was still discrimination that was happening. So is that truly a pursuit of, of life, liberty, and that pursuit of happiness? So that was kind of the opening way for us to say, that's a story that we can ask about any culture in America.
Right.
I happen to be Scott Irish, and I can tell you that we were not always thought well of in America. So
Right. Well, and beyond.
Oh,
go ahead.
Hang on. I'm sorry. One thing I don't think we said. For those of you who don't know, the Turner family is the free black family that lives in Prairie Town. I just dropped the Turners and didn't say that. The context there.
I was going to say the other thing I appreciate about all of the things that you're talking about, PLPG, Torn, it is not only, yes, it's expanding the stories that we're telling, it's also expanding how we're telling those stories. So with Prairie Town, a lot of people think of us as a living history site only, but with Promised Land as Proving Ground, and now with the new Museum Experience Center, taking that everyone and thinking about how people learn and how they learn differently. And not everyone... a living history environment is not always the best for everyone. And so how can we, again, try and hit as many people as we can with, having traditional museum exhibits, having a bit of a mix with when it comes to PLPG, because we're still adding in Promised Land as Proving Ground programming with costumed characters. They don't look the programs don't look the same as a regular Prairie Town. It's more timed. It's more a scripted piece. But then with the Museum Center, this Museum Experience Center, this is a real museum. I hate to say real museum, but it feels like a traditional museum with objects that tell stories, and there's text. Not to undersell it, because there's some really cool immersive things going on as well inside. I'm thinking specifically about Torn, and how that has allowed us to bring in tribal partners to consult on something that they can tangibly see as well.
Yeah. So as we think about what we're doing out in Prairie Town, and I want to backtrack a little bit and talk about the Museum Experience Center, but only in this context. If we think about Promised Land as Proving Ground, we have those 4 F's that are our theme, faith, food, family, and fellowship. And we think about the Museum Experience Center. For the first time when we open it later this month and going forward, we can be truly a year-round experience. So in those bad weather months when it's kind of hard, we don't really do programming in Prairie Town. We used to have it closed totally, and we just kind of had, I would say, our spring and summer and fall season, and then the winter season was just inside the building. But there's only so many things we could do in the old building. Now we're going to be a year-round attraction, and we have some remarkable things. And people might think that we're overemphasizing the Museum Experience Center, but I said this just yesterday. Think of the Museum Experience Center as the appetizer that's setting the table for the main course that you're getting ready to go see in Prairie Town and all the other things that we have, including our Conner Prairie trails. I mean, those 2.5 miles of trails to be able to engage with nature and things that we're doing. There's so many things that we're doing here. And the new Museum Experience Center, for the first time in a long time, we're setting the stage for our guests to truly engage and go out onto our grounds and do those things, including PLPG, and learn these stories and truly be part of it. Go back to that we the people thing. But yeah, don't get me started on the Museum Experience Center and all the great things you're going to see in there. I think that's probably for another podcast.
Yes, yeah.
Oh gosh, it's so great.
So I do want to bring up Made by Us, because this is something that is very important to both of us. Do you mind sort of explaining what Made by Us is and how you are involved?
Sure. Made by Us is a national organization now, and it started, I believe, in 2016. So Conner Prairie wasn't there at the beginning, but I think 2016, 2017, and 9 national partners came together. So you think about things like, Colonial Williamsburg and the Constitution Center, and they were really focused on this idea of the semi-quincentennial. So the idea, all right, 10 years from now, 2026, what are we going to be doing as these large national organizations to really talk about the 250, America 250, but what democracy, and especially what does civics look like? Because younger generations, civics hasn't been necessarily taught at school the same way it was in my generation. So it kind of started that way. And I remember getting a phone call from one of my colleagues at one of these original 9 partnering organizations and saying, we've been, and I knew of their work because I'd talked to him before, and I said, well, God, I would love for Conner Prairie to be involved in that. At that point, I'd already come to Conner Prairie. And he said, we may be expanding this. Right now, it's just started with this partnering group. And then he called and said, we just had a meeting today, and we're going to open this up. We're going to open it up to all museums, and we would love for Conner Prairie to be at the table early on. And so that's really how we got involved is, when you're in a profession, you talk to colleagues, you listen, you hear what they're doing with things, and sometimes you're bold enough to invite yourself to the table. And I think that's kind of what I did, is because I knew Conner Prairie needed to be at the table at Made by Us. And what I mean by at the table is, have a board seat. And so I had the good fortune that I was nominated and brought onto the board of Made by Us. So it's a group now of over, I think, close to 450 history museums and historical societies, maybe a couple libraries and archives thrown into that are really focused on the Gen Z. And specifically, what does your generation, because you're both Gen Z, what do you feel about the 250th? What do you want out of this celebration? What do you feel about democracy? And I know from my conversations kind of with both of you and others that your feelings aren't the same as mine. If I think back to when I was of your generation back then, I think I probably had some of the same thoughts, may have expressed them a little differently, but still, that's what Made by Us is. So it's now this group of people that have created programs, and probably the program that most museum people know about is Civic Season, which is really focused on that period between Juneteenth and July 4th, where our historic any of the Made by Us museums, we focus on civics and the programming and things we do. And there's so many different programs. One of the ones that's easy to remember is Slice of History. And it's a way of getting members or a generation of Gen Z to come out and feel comfortable and safe in an environment to have a slice of pizza, but talk about history and open the door of, ask the question, what do you want out of 250? And you might say, well, I don't want to celebrate at all. I don't like America right now. And I've heard that. I've heard that before out of the younger generation. I don't like America right now. Well, I push back and say, well, what can we do to make it better? What don't you like? How can we change that? And I think that's what Made by Us as the larger group of organizations and creating dialogue and opening that up so your generation can take the reins and you can make sure that these stories, the things that you want to tell in the next 50 years, the next 250 years, are being done. And so that's why I'm excited about Conner Prairie not only being at the table, we're now looked at a lot of the things we're doing. As a matter of fact, I'll go ahead and kind of announce, I probably shouldn't do this, but when I was thinking about all the things that we're doing this year, and even around the civic season, thinking about all the things that we're doing, I'm like, so how could we get more Gen Zers to actually come here every day, be members. And I thought, well, maybe we just give them a membership. Maybe that's the way to do it. So this idea has evolved, but we're going to be giving away 250 memberships
I love that.
in the 250th year to the Gen Z. And so haven't figured out yet. We'll be talking about this. Haven't figured out what that looks like. Whether or not that happens on the day that we do Slice of History, or it'll probably be during civic season, but we'll start promoting that. And that way we can get Gen Z truly at the table. We can get them through our doors and make this a safe place and continue to say, well, what other programs do you want to do? And so I think I don't know that I would have thought that way even 7 or 8 years ago at Conner Prairie. I've had to be engaged with Made by Us and just get really excited as a boomer, excited about what your generation, what you're thinking, and what your passions are, and why you feel the way you do at this time about America, and how we can change it, and how my generation can help this generation make those changes. And I think at the core, that's what Made by Us is, and I think that's why I wanted you and other of our Gen Z staff members to get engaged, and I actually kind of got you engaged through the Youth 250 Council, but and then now we literally have a civic engagement specialist. We didn't have that 4 years ago, but Made by Us led us into the fact that we wanted to have a civic engagement specialist, and so we have evolved so much at Conner Prairie just in the last 4 or 5 years because of our I think our role with Made by Us in civic season.
Yeah. And shout out Cameron Bembry. She's helped us a lot behind the scenes. We're going to be doing a live podcast during civic season with
cool.
With high school students that are running the Juneteenth Jubilee that is hosted here. So really excited about that. Make sure to listen to that. That'll be our last episode, I think, is how we're thinking about the future. So we're bringing in some high schoolers to talk about their opinions. And yeah, Easton, I want to talk about Youth 250. And Easton was there. Made by Us came here and hosted a Youth 250 like listening session. And that's something that I really appreciate about Made by Us is how much it is just constantly asking youth what they want and making it very accessible for museums to act on. So they collect a lot of data. Gen Z is the largest, most diverse. If you think of the people turning 18 in America 250 is the largest, most diverse class America has ever seen. And so there is this real
even larger than mine. The boomer used to be that.
Yeah, really, it's a huge opportunity to be saying, how do you want to shape this country? And America 250 is the perfect. So I was just curious. You were there at kind of the beginning. I was also there, but thoughts on how Made by Us was getting youth involved?
Oh, they did a great job. They did a great job of inviting people in and kind of meeting them where they, where I guess I should say where we are. But it was great. I really liked how they, they did the typical icebreakers, but they got kind of, we got past the, surface level icebreaker type stuff. I mean, icebreakers are great. I love icebreakers, but like sometimes it's cooler to kind of get into the nitty gritty of like, okay, how do we all curate in our own lives? That was the first time I ever started to think of like, oh, if you're putting together like a playlist for a certain vibe, I do that all the time. Cleaning the house, playing kickball. On my way to play kickball, I make my own playlist, and it's like, okay, well, you just curated. So that's curator doesn't have to be a person with 9 million degrees. 9 million, like school degrees with like a bunch of credentials, sitting somewhere. We all curate, and we all kind of have these universal aspects of our lives that and even our relationship with history and nostalgia and things like that. So I liked that conversation. I also liked that I was challenged. I hated the last thing we did, which is interesting because you normally don't. They saved the hard thing for the end. It was an exercise. What do you think they mind if I actually say what it is?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so
I'm a board member. Go ahead.
There we go. Thank you. I have permission from the board. But we had this exercise where we had to work backwards as far as like laws.
I remember that because I was in the room. Yeah.
So it was like if you want there to be a future where like they did this, they laid out this little monologue where like a person was like, it's like the future, it's like 2080, and they leave their house and they don't have to lock their door, and they're out here, and there's like, they're conserving their energy, the lights turn off after them, and it's like this futuristic cool thing where we have, you know, our carbon emissions are super low and all that stuff. And we had to work backwards by decades to say what would need to happen before, like 10 years, 20 years, 30 years before, for this to be a reality. And it was so hard, right? Because I was just sitting there like, okay, well, they left their door open, so clearly there's no crime, but how do you get rid of crime? And what does that mean? And so it was really rough. And even though I hated it, I can tell you like a ton of details from it because it just stuck with me that way. So I think that way that they work their way up to getting your brain really critically moving, and also just thinking like, you know, that future is possible if we have enough people to get there, to put their perspectives together.
You know, what's interesting is I was there that day because I wanted to observe, but I actually participated. And I remember going through that activity now, and you said it was tough. It was really tough for me because I'm thinking in the past and trying to project that forward. And for your generation, you can just think about the future.
Yeah, and something that I appreciated with that is they're also really good at these intergenerational conversations. While yes, they want to amplify and uplift Gen Z voices, that doesn't do anything if there's no one else in the room for us to talk to. Like, that's something that they really talk about, is that it's not just like, oh, we're going to amplify. We need to work with the CEOs. We need to work with these institutions, not just museums, but the things that are either I don't want to say obstacles, but the things that are in society that are creating the systems that we either agree with or want change, or disagree with or want changed. And that is how we end up making change. And so we have to be having these conversations. And the way that they lay that out is so important. And then
did a document? I think a document came from that. I think that we're still using with Made by Us.
Yeah, Made by Us obviously does a ton of share-outs, one-pagers. They have a bunch of toolkits. They've gone through 2 different Youth 250 toolkits. Youth 250 has taken a couple of different forms. So they started.
You actually helped with one of the Youth 250.
I helped with the first one, and then I'm pretty sure Co-Generate just came out with a new one. And something that I appreciate them on the museum level is they've, for a long time, have pushed having youth advisory boards so that you can have those intergenerational conversations, and it's youth that are in your community, so you can have those conversations with the people that will be impacted by it. But something that now I have got involved in with Norman's urging and support is Youth 250 Bureau, which is if your institution does not have the capacity, resources, and this isn't just museums, to have that youth advisory board, Youth 250 is trained up and ready to have these conversations across the country. So I spent the better half of, or I guess the past year on this board, getting to talk to museums all over and seeing their plans for America 250. And it's been incredible. And it's made me so optimistic about this moment, way more than I was before, about how museums are approaching.
See, I'm getting all tingly now because that's exactly what I wanted out of this year, out of the 250th, is that your generation had that type of feeling.
Right. And it's not just that like I'm feeling heard. It's that institutions truly do want to listen. Because sometimes it feels like you're shoving something down someone's throat. But all of the institutions we talk to truly are excited to engage and are just curious about how we think about things, how we want to interact with their institution. And so it's been an incredible thing to work with.
So that's where the Made by Us, the large organization and board, raising money and those types of things. So literally that cohort that you ran of 250 youth that were going out and doing the museums, we had to raise money because you had stipends to travel. So if a museum didn't have an advisory group, you could actually bring it in, and Made by Us actually paid for that for a museum that wanted to bring you in.
Right. And that also is just showing that we are appreciated for our perspective, right? And because that's always hard, is how do you get these advisory groups without the resources, et cetera. The other thing I wanted to talk about with Youth 250 is, again, something that has impacted me personally. Going to grad school with museum studies, I felt the need to grow up really quickly, professionalize. Especially here at Conner Prairie, I got moved into a director's position. And so I felt like I was in meetings with people not of my generation. And I felt like I had to fit in that way. And Youth 250 has kind of made it be like, no, it's okay to have your perspective. It's okay to be
That's
young.
right.
It's okay to be influenced by all of these things that make up kind of youth culture. And that's important, especially if we're looking at building programming for that audience. And so that is something that has completely shifted. Because I remember with like the podcast, I was always stressed out that, it's not scripted. It's a little more relaxed. And well, that's how I like to listen to podcasts.
Yeah.
But I feel like as a museum, we should, have everything scripted. We should know exactly our dates, et cetera. And if we're not doing that, we're not doing what a museum's doing. And so Easton also helped me with that when we were first working on the first couple iterations of the podcast, that, sometimes it's okay to lean into what your audience, how they interact with, for example, media. So Youth 250 for me has impacted the way I think about the programs we do here at Conner Prairie, the way we run the podcast. But yeah, so yeah.
Well, the very thing that you just said about Youth 250 and taking that role on is what really excites me as the CEO of Conner Prairie today. And I think about, I'm at the end of my career, just quite honestly. So I'm thinking about this next generation of museum leaders, and I'm just so excited about where Conner Prairie is at today. Looking across the table, and I think about my younger colleagues and what you're doing and your passions. I'm like, oh my God, we're in such good hands as a profession, and Conner Prairie is going to be in such good hands because of people like the two of you that really care about history and care about we the people and making sure those stories are told. So if Youth 250 helped you do that and Conner Prairie is a place where you feel comfortable, then I'm happy for both of those.
Well, thank you. And thank you for trusting us, especially, having the mic. And trusting that younger generation to, be a voice for ourselves. So
Yes, thank you. We appreciate your trust in us.
I do want to I have a bit of an open-ended question, because truly you are doing so many things behind the scenes that often don't get looked. What other behind-the-scene things have you been doing to prepare Conner Prairie for America 250?
Well, probably some that people wished I wasn't behind the scenes doing. So I think you both know that, and I don't mind saying this, I'm dyslexic. And so I'm both left and right brained. And so I can see big ideas, big systems very quickly, and I have a solution for them, even if it's not the right one. But I have an opinion on that, and so I'm a verbal communicator. But I'm also very creative. And so in my 38 plus years, even though I've been mainly in leadership, I've been at smaller places where I was not only the leader, I had to do the educational programming, I had to develop the exhibits, I had to be the curator, I had to do all these things. And so as a result, I really get jazzed about being involved in that, even at this point in my career. So I think behind the scenes, as we talk about the Museum Experience Center, working with our experience team on things like Power of Place and Wellspring and Torn and just all the things we're doing, working with Promised Land is Proving Ground, even this podcast, just hearing what you're doing, being able to participate a couple of times now, are things that, not every CEO gets a chance to do. And so I think working behind the scenes, not only with my colleagues at Conner Prairie, but people in the community preparing for what they're wanting to do. I know one of the things that we did not set up initially, but now we're working behind the scenes, is whether or not we can have a naturalization ceremony here this year. And I think we're going to be able to do that, but it means working in the community behind the scenes. And sometimes that's what a leader can do, is make those types of phone calls. So it's items like that. But I have to say the Conner Prairie stuff, just literally being able to work with colleagues and just be part of a team, be part of a thought process, and know that. I mean, I keep on going back to Power of Place, but that idea that I've sowed for a long time, that this land and this river has had a story for a long time before anyone ever arrived on the scene, and that we need to honor that. So that's why when I see that in this new immersive experience, it really makes me feel good that I was part of a creative process that's made that happen. I wasn't the person who did it. I was part of a creative process. We have many more creative and talented people that have been the creative process behind getting that done with our exhibit contractors and such. But still, that's been fun. It's been fun to be engaged, even with you, like on things like Youth 250 and Cameron and just everyone to say, what are the programs we're doing? And maybe sometimes challenging you. And like the thing I said about the membership, that's just a crazy idea. I literally came up with it last week. I'd had a conversation actually with Cameron about something, and we're talking about could we do a naturalization, could we do something else? And I went to our director of membership and just on a whim said, hey, I've got this crazy idea. What if we gave and it started with a discount on the 250th. And we gave a discount to get more, and we set a goal of 250 new members. And then the membership development department took that and ran with it and said, well, what if we got a grant? And that actually would underwrite the memberships so there wouldn't be any cost to this group. And now the question becomes, if we have more than 250, Gen Zers that want to become members, what does that look like? But I think that's a really great problem to have. So, yeah. But that's an example of just these crazy things that sometimes, things pop in your head. And for me, being, as I've already said, I'm very much a visual thinker and a verbal communicator when it comes to those types of things. And a lot of times they just pop out of my head and pop out of my mouth at the same time. And sometimes they work and sometimes they don't.
Well, I will just say, clearly a lot of the things with Smithsonian affiliates, we barely mentioned, but the Democracy and Dialogue program that we're doing with Smithsonian, all of these things that are happening behind the scenes, just thank you for setting us up for success with them, because it truly there's a long runway before America 250 that you've been working on.
Yeah, and as you said, we haven't really touched on the Smithsonian, but the fact that we're one of the 25 locations in America that the Smithsonian's going to for making history, making change, and that's a direct correlation to Conner Prairie's role as an affiliate, and once again, me probably being a little too loud in my insistence that Conner Prairie should not only be at the table, we should be one of those. But that's what it takes as a leader sometimes. You've got to push. If you believe in the work that your organization is doing, you're automatically going to do that. That's what you're doing on this podcast. And so that's why a place like Conner Prairie is so important. We get to do those type of things.
While we have our dear CEO in the room, did you know that this podcast has reached 49 different countries?
No, I did not know that.
Well, we're going to list them all out very quickly. So in the United States, we have a unique listener count of somewhere between 11,678 to 13,128 people.
That's amazing. I remember when we had like 25.
We had 25 and we met in the Symphony Bowl changing room.
We did.
We have come a long way. And we're also reaching, in addition to the United States, we've reached Canada, the United Kingdom, Wales, and Scotland. Yes, we count those as separate countries. Germany, Norway, Singapore, the Philippines, Chile, the Netherlands, Mexico, Costa Rica, Sweden, Puerto Rico, which is its own country as well, Romania, China, Italy, Spain, India, France, Belgium, Austria, Ireland, Belize, Pakistan, New Zealand, Ukraine, Cyprus, Portugal, Brazil, Zambia, Japan, Thailand, Malta, Israel, Saint Martin, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Slovakia, Turks and Caicos, Australia, Martinique, Ecuador, the Bahamas, the Czech Republic, Switzerland, Azerbaijan, Morocco, and Colombia. And we love you all.
We do love you all, and it just confirms for me that our aspirational goal of changing the way the world views and uses museums can be accomplished, and our mission statement, which says we can serve everyone, can be accomplished through a podcast. So for all of your podcast listeners, now viewers, but listeners before, thank you for being part of this program at Conner Prairie and being part of our museum. You're part of us now. You're part of the Conner Prairie team.
Mm-hmm. Welcome to the family, folks.
That's right.
So the final question that we asked people on our last show, and I think we should do it for this show as well, is what is your hope for the future, especially based on all of the conversation we've had today?
Well, my hope for the future is that your generation will find an America that's more welcoming than my generation left you. And I mean that sincerely. I've thought about this a lot, especially being a social historian. I think about, I was around during everything that was happening with the civil rights movement and everything. I didn't participate, but I was old enough to remember all those things. And then going through high school and college, becoming a historian, I'm thinking to myself, look, it's over. It won. We don't have to worry about that anymore. And being at museums, we would always, and being the person that could help make those programs happen at museums, would always want to push the envelope on the stories that we're telling, but only so far. Only far enough that if someone were to raise concerns about it, sometimes as a leader you have to back off on that. And I've thought a lot about that over the last decade, especially since I've been here at Conner Prairie. What a disservice that perhaps that's done to your generation, that perhaps my generation should have been bolder and say, no, we're not going to stop doing that. We're telling the truth. This is what we do. And so I have regrets sometimes as a public historian, as a leader, that perhaps I should have pushed back those things sometimes. That's why I try to be as bold as possible now in my leadership role with Conner Prairie to make sure that we do these things, because I want to make sure that the future that you're going to be responsible for is one that you can actually work with. There's a lot of roadblocks. There's a lot of barriers that are up right now, a lot of rhetoric that's creating those. But I truly believe, because I've seen enough history to know this will happen, that smart people and passionate people, when they're open to hearing everyone's side and open to dialogue, can make remarkable things happen. And I believe that our history, while it may be ugly, it's also glorious. And my hope for the future, my wish for the future, is that you will realize that glorious side of American democracy, that you'll realize that glorious and spectacular part of what that Declaration of Independence said 250 years ago, that we have the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And I hope that's what your generation finds.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And I will plug this because I know you're very excited. We are also asking of our guests their wishes too. We want to hear what the guests coming through the museum, their wish for the future is. And so we'll have a wish wall where you'll be able to see yours amongst many others and see how a lot of us, our wishes are very similar.
And you can see that physically in the building at Conner Prairie, but we also have it on our website with the wish wall. We'll be re-engaging with that. So, yeah, it's really exciting, all the things that museums are doing on this 250th that I think is quite different than what we did 50 years ago.
Awesome.
Well, that was a really good conversation. I want to thank y'all for coming in, taking some time out. I know we're all busy, could have been doing other things, but instead we sat and rapped for a little bit, and I think I feel very empowered as well. I hope it's the same for y'all. So we want to thank everyone for both listening and watching. I can finally say watching now.
Wow.
And we're going to keep it going. So you can follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. We'll also be on the Conner Prairie website.
And YouTube now.
And YouTube. We'll be on YouTube too. That's great.
And you're creating Conner Prairie TV, right?
Maybe for the 300.
But yeah, thank y'all so much for stopping by and listening to us. And we'll be back for more next time.
Yeah, thank you.
But until then, I'm Easton.
And I'm Ryan.
And I'm Norman today.
Hey, take care now.